What we're going to do now is we're going to show you an interview with one of my heroes of sort of the recent years, because first of all, it's a tool that I love using. It's Duolingo, and she's just a really great person. So it's Gina Gotthilf. And what Gina did is she led growth and marketing at Duolingo for 5 years, helping it grow from 3 to 200 million users actually in 4 years. 4 years, imagine that. With zero paid acquisition, really product-led growth. Now, more recently, she's consulted on growth for a number of initiatives like the presidential campaign and nonprofits and a medical tech company, and actually many, many others. Now, Gina's joined us to discuss why learning is the bedrock of growth. She kind of agrees with us on this one. And she wants to give her recommendations for getting started in growth, marketing and product-led growth in general. Now, unfortunately, she actually couldn't make it live today. Long story, but she was really kind in accepting that we do the session before and that we actually recorded the session beforehand. So we're going to kick off with that video now, and you can still put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them in the chat directly. So let's kick off with the video right now of Gina Gotthilf, ex-Duolingo, and currently helping people with growth and product-led growth. Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're really excited today. We have Gina Gotthilf, been practicing that last name, today with us. So what's great about Gina is that she led growth and marketing at Duolingo for 5 years. And her business card a little bit is in large part that she grew it from 3 to 200 million users in 4 years with, I believe, no paid acquisition. We'll be sharing some links, specifically an interview with First Round Capital. We'll be sharing that in the chat. And more recently, she's been consulting on growth for a number of initiatives, including a presidential campaign, a nonprofit, and an ed tech company, a medical ed tech company, and many others. We thought that what was really interesting with Gina is her career path, how she got into growth, what she actually studied, and we'll be discussing a little bit what growth is and how to get into a career in growth. And then we'll also talk about growth itself. And earlier in her career, Gina led Tumblr's growth in Latin America, and I believe developed digital marketing campaigns for LVMH, which Louis Vuitton, the luxury brand, and Estee Lauder. She's actually Brazilian with a German last name, studied philosophy and neuroscience at, what's the name of the university? Bondays?
And so I started at Reed College, which is known because Steve Jobs went there, but then Steve Jobs dropped out. So I also dropped out because I wanted to be like Steve Jobs. I'm only kidding about half of that statement. I did drop out. And then I finished my studies at Brandeis University.
Brandeis University. And the reason I was saying your career was kind of unusual is that, and you were also telling me before we started that everything sort of worked out in the end. And you've led growth and marketing at, I believe, one of the world's most famous brands when you think about Duolingo and companies. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got there? I mean, was there a set clear path for marketing, or was it a little bit more ambiguous than that?
How much time do you have? It was like the squiggliest path ever. And I don't even think I got anywhere, actually. I think I'm still in the middle of my squiggly path.
Okay.
But yeah, I studied philosophy and I worked at a neuroscience lab and co-authored a neuroscience study. And I wanted to work for the Gates Foundation or some nonprofit, as a good philosophy major would. But I really wanted to get a visa in the United States. And it was the height of the recession. No one was hiring. All of my international friends had to go home. So I applied to 100 different jobs, like anything that I could get. And that's how I landed my first job in marketing, even though I had sworn to myself early on that I would never work in marketing because my dad has an advertising agency in Brazil and I was very idealistic. But I wanted to live in New York, and I made a really low salary and I lived in a very not good apartment that my parents were horrified when they visited me. But that's how I got into marketing. And then from then, like I said, how much time do you have? Like I have stories about how like my first manager had a problem with heroin, and that's how I ended up taking up the account. So like that's a whole story. But long story short, I ended up getting hired by Tumblr to lead their growth efforts in Latin America with a focus on Brazil. It wasn't called growth. It was just like, hey, can you help us grow? We don't have a budget, thank you, bye. And like just trying to figure that out. And after that, I was like, okay, I like this. I like this whole like trying to figure out how to get a product into people's hands, especially without the money aspect of it. And so I started a small agency. It was really just me and like an intern at one point in Brazil to help tech companies grow in Brazil and Latin America. And that's how Duolingo found me. I was a consultant for them. And so I was doing that for a while. And halfway through my time at Duolingo, they were like, we want you to own growth officially, because growth then was like a thing that people were talking about. And it was my first foray into working with product. Until then, I was just like kind of in marketing land. Yeah, that's how I got to growth.
So would you say that the crossover between marketing and product creates sort of the definition of what growth is? Because you said you were in marketing before, and then at Duolingo you finally transferred in something called growth, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's how that word is perceived, that it's a very metrics-based approach to marketing. And I think the intersection of marketing and product is, yeah, that basically is where it's at. It depends on who you ask. A lot of people, when you ask them what growth is, will say, oh, like acquisition, like Facebook marketing. And so then we're just going back to marketing, but with metrics. But yeah, I think it's much more of understanding marketing from not only like a metrics driven perspective, but also really thinking about user growth more holistically, not just when you first get a user, but also how to keep the user around and how to make them tell their friends, etc., and use all the different levers you can with engineering and design, which was new to me because marketing, in my experience at Tumblr and other companies, even at Duolingo, was seen as this kind of like inferior team that like didn't really get it, but like was just there to like make whatever, like the product team would make something and the marketing team was like getting it out into the world. But the product team, I think, really always thought, we're making something amazing, people will come, it doesn't really matter what the marketing team does that much. It's always how I felt. So it was like this amazing opportunity to work with product engineers, designers, product managers.
And so how did you deal with, I don't know if you have it, but a lot of people in growth feel they have sort of an imposter syndrome when it comes to what you mentioned, maybe engineering and design. How did you approach that psychologically, but also just from a capabilities point of view? How did you upskill yourself a bit more on code, a bit more on product, a bit more on UX?
To be fair, I still feel imposter syndrome every day. I say imposters because I don't know really that it's an imposter versus like, it's not a syndrome. I just think that I'm actually maybe an imposter, but I definitely felt that way. It's very daunting to work with engineers and designers as a marketer because you don't understand their language and you don't understand what they're doing. And I really was afraid of being perceived as not very capable or not very smart or experienced. So I definitely had a lot of fear in my first few weeks or months on the job. And what I did was, first, I just read everything I could, specifically like stuff that was written by Andrew Chen, who was still doing growth at Uber at the time, and Brian Balfour and those guys. And I started reading up anything I could. And then my team started as just me and an engineer. They were like, we'll give you just an engineer. We'll see what you can do with that one resource. So I tried to be his partner as much as possible and say like, hey, I'm your manager technically, but I'm like, I don't know anything and we need to come up with something together and I'm here to make it happen, and learning from the engineer as much as possible. And then, I tried to brush up on terminology and words and try to learn important things that I kept hearing in the company, like statistical significance, like what is that? So that I could talk about it in a way that sounded intelligent and really actually be able to make an impact. But the truth is, David, I think you learn by doing. I think a lot of people are paralyzed by the fear of like, I don't know, I need to learn first and then I will do. And my career so far has been like, I don't know, I'm going to do and figure it out as I go. And it's been a lot more effective and more quick for me to grow that way.
And how are you given sort of that opportunity, let's say? So I'm specifically interested in that transition from marketing to growth. What had you done that that made people feel confident that you could pull it off?
Yeah.
How
So
did you sell yourself, basically?
I don't think I sold myself in that case, because it kind of came out of left field for me.
Yep.
But I was tasked to make Duolingo grow with no budget, right? And so my first approach was a lot of like partnerships, PR, etc., but always looking at acquisition. Like my only metric was how many users am I getting. That's the only thing the CEO cared about.
So
Which
can you just take us back? Because nowadays we see this as this established app that everyone's had an interaction with. We're talking really early days, correct? Like,
yes.
were there a lot of funds? Was there a lot of budget? Was there a big tech stack, a big marketing stack? What did that look like?
Sure. So I was employee number 20. And I have to say, it was a very lucky situation, because Luis Fanan, the founder and CEO of Duolingo, he invented the CAPTCHA, that thing that you type to prove that you're human on the internet. He sold 2 companies to Google, and then he gave a TED Talk. And in his TED Talk, he said he was creating this thing called Duolingo. And so because of that, we had like a lot of people sign up for like early access. So that meant that very early on as a product team, even without me, so I wasn't on the product team, everyone was A/B testing and trying and using those users and all the data they could to optimize retention. So I think that's important to lay out as a foundation, because Duolingo didn't suddenly care about retention or suddenly care about gamification. It was built in from the start. I was hired, and so I didn't have a budget. And what I did was, I was in Brazil at the time, and I thought, I think that like what the same thing I did with Tumblr is going to work, which is journalists will really want to talk to this person and will really want to hear about this mission, not about like a new language learning app, but about this mission to bring free language education to the world and how it can, impact Brazilians. And then, I tied it back into the CAPTCHA thing. Like, you have to find the hook, something that makes it sound interesting. Yep. So I did that, and mainly in a lot of localization stuff. I then was asked to do the same thing around the world. So I went to Chile, Argentina, then like Turkey, India, Japan, China, Spain, Germany, Mexico, like a lot of countries to launch Duolingo, always with that metrics-based approach. Because we were so early on, it didn't matter. The CEO didn't care about brand awareness, or like he thought that he was a computer scientist, right? So he thought that this whole thing was marketing is very flimsy, and he doesn't want to hear about like how many hits you got in PR. He just wants to know how many people downloaded my thing. That's it. That's all he cared about. And so I think that started shaping my way of thinking strategically about marketing in a way that it ended up like helping me get to the growth mindset. And I've been doing that for 2.5 years, and I owned basically communications, marketing, social media, a lot of the email marketing, although not the A/B testing so much, and early partnerships to get PR. Anything that that people reached out to Duolingo about, and they were like, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I want to partner with Duolingo," they would just send to me and say like, "Figure out if we should do this or not." And so I'd been there for 2.5 years when the board said to the CEO and the CTO, "We need someone to own the growth metric," because so far really it had been Luis Fanan. And honestly, to this day, Luis is head of growth at Duolingo. Like he wakes up every morning and he checks what the numbers are like and how it compared to yesterday, and immediately knows if there's something off. So he really I've never reached the point where I'm as good as he is. Yeah. But they were like, "You have your eye on a lot of things. We need someone to actually own this metric." And so they thought about hiring someone, and they looked around, and they ended up deciding to just take me and put me in charge of that. It made sense. They trusted me at that point. We had grown a lot. I had taken a lot of projects that I didn't have any experience in and succeeded. Although that sounds very nice to say, but like it was super rocky and tough and scary. But so then they trusted me at that point. The one thing I will say is that as soon as I became head of growth, I also attended board meetings. And I remember one board meeting, afterwards we were walking down the street, I think we were in San Francisco, and I overheard one of the board members say to the CEO, "Gina's really not metrics driven enough," after the board meeting. And it crushed me. crushed. I went home and I think I went to the hotel and cried, to be super honest.
Yeah.
And at first I was mad. I was like, what does she mean I'm not metrics driven? Of course I'm metrics driven. Like, you know, and I like went down this whole, like, I can't believe. And then I started thinking about it and I realized that she was right. And I wasn't metrics driven enough. And I don't think I even understood what that meant at that time. So I think that was a big pivotal moment for me in terms of the transitioning from marketing to growth. But it's not like I was just like overnight ready to take on the team and like make it happen. I was just every day learning and every day trying to you know, figure it out.
And speaking of learning, do you have like how do you learn? Do you just Google, or is there a method to the madness?
I Google.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's some method, right? Like you look at the companies that successfully grew and that the names that you really recognize, and you look at what they did and you try to understand and you try to apply it to your company. Like as an example, kind of like a more fun example. So in my team, we wanted to improve retention. So one thing that I did was ask everyone to pick a game. Well, we would come up with like the top games in the App Store, and I would assign a different game to a different person, and they would have to play that game for the week and then come back with like what they thought was most interesting about like retention, like things that they thought were leading to retention. And then we would list them and think, how could we apply this to Duolingo theoretically? Is this something we think we can use? So yeah, just Googling, looking at what's working. So if you want to improve retention, you know, games are like the highest retention apps out there. And then there are leaders, you know, like I think everyone in the Reforge Collective, Andrew Chen, Brian Balfour, Elena Verina, like all these people publish, and, you know, subscribing to those newsletters, all of those things make it easier today. But for me, it's just Googling a lot. Every day, I think I spend hours Googling for things I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe just one from left field a bit. What's maybe the best piece of content you've read or consumed in the past month? I'll ask you small random questions from time to time. Something that really hit home.
It's, you know, I have an answer to that, but it's not what you would expect, because these days I'm really obsessing about community building and the future of community.
Okay.
And so I don't think it's what you want, but I read this David Brooks essay on The Atlantic, and I think it's called "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake." And it's about how people, like how families are evolving and our societies are changing in terms of how we live and why the nuclear family exists. Anyway, so I'm sorry, but that's what comes to mind because I read that and I was like, yes, this.
That's fantastic.
It's not growth.
We'll share that one in the notes as well. I think I found it. I'll send it over. Cool. And I think you were talking about a little bit, actually, you know what, let's go back to career path 2 seconds. And then I'll ask you a few questions about that are already being asked about what it means to be more metrics driven, and also about how growth was measured at Duolingo, and maybe some of the key metrics and maybe some leading indicators as well. Has there ever been a time from a career point of view leading to growth, right? Just really leading to growth where maybe, you know, something felt like it could have been a mistake, or a personal move or a career move that might have felt like a mistake or might have felt totally random, but that ended up playing a big part in where you are today? Yeah,
most of my career, honestly. And I'm not even being exaggerating, but I can give you examples. Like the fact that I went to study philosophy, I went to read, I dropped out of my first college. So like that was like, I already felt like a failure. I went home and got super depressed. Then I went to Brandeis, studied philosophy, couldn't get a job. And it was just like, ended up getting like this like internship. I was the only intern who had already graduated. So I just felt like the bottom of the barrel. Okay. And then, you know, I was working in luxury marketing, which is the last thing I wanted to be doing. I used to have this t-shirt as like a high schooler that said "Fashion sucks."
With an working for Estee Lauder and I
was working for LVMH and Estee Lauder. Yeah, so it was like, you know, and then also I had a lot of trouble with the visa in the United States. So when my first job, the head of HR became the head of social media because he was friends with the owner, and renegated all his HR responsibilities. So he forgot to apply for my visa, for my H-1B. So I had to go home to Brazil, and I felt like I failed at that point. Then I got back to the US and got fired. Like, and then at that point, I think is when I really was just like, you know what, this whole corporate ladder thing is dumb. I never even wanted it anyway. New York is a terrible place with people who are super mean, and this is not for me. And I never even wanted to do marketing. So I actually like went home to Brazil and bought a round the world ticket and decided to go live on farms. You know, the WOOF program, where you can, it's called the World Organization of Organic Farms or something like that. And you can go live on farms.
I'm going.
Yeah, and my idea was like, I know I don't have any money, but I'm just gonna go, and you can like work on the farm and they let you live there and eat. So I was gonna go like travel around the world doing that. And that's when I got an email from someone from Tumblr, because I had met them like throughout my career. By the way, networking has been extremely important, and not in the sense of the word that people think like, oh, I don't go to networking parties and give people my card, but like it's developing a really good network has been super important, especially as a Brazilian in the United States, because I didn't have family or any like former connections here. So I got an email from Tumblr saying, hey, we're thinking of going in Brazil. We would like your help. And I responded, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing this whole like marketing thing or career thing. Like, I'm done. I'm traveling around the world. And I remember getting on the phone with them where they convinced me that I have to realize that if I'm going to go travel around the world, I need money. Even though like, I was 25 and they were like, listen, kid, that's really cool, but how about you just like take this job for like, we'll hire you for a month and you'll help us hire a person in Brazil, and you'll help us like do initial things, like introduce us to press and do meetups and whatever. And then you can go on your trip or whatever, like eat, pray, love. And I was just like, okay, that makes sense. And so I did that for a month. It was super fun. And in the end, they didn't like any of the candidates, and they asked me to stay on full time. And it was like, you know, they were asking me to do something I'd never done, which is like help this tech startup that has a buzzy name grow in Brazil. You're the only person here. And also my boss, who was one of my good friends today, was like an engineer who had been put in charge of Brazil because he had wanderlust. Like no one knew anything, nothing. And so like that was so interesting. And I really think at that moment changed everything for me, because I went from like doing like digital PR or whatever, climbing the ladder, to under like being more this growth mindset. Like I like to make tech companies grow, and it got me into tech. And yeah, there have been a lot of moments like that. Even when Duolingo offered me a position, I also said no. As you can tell, I'm a little like, I'm embarrassed about how obnoxious I can be sometimes. I said no because I thought I don't want to work for anyone else, because I was fired and it was too painful. And I want to just own my own company. So I'm going to be a consultant, and ended up deciding to join full time because I thought that I could make much more of an impact in the world by helping some of the smartest people I'd ever met move further than just like by myself.
Yep.
And that was also a pivotal moment in my career. Like, you know, like my 5 years at Duolingo taught me so much.
We have this this ongoing discussion, I think, here at Growth Tribe, but also it just keeps going about generalists versus specialists. You sound like kind of a generalist, I have to say.
I am.
Kind of scary being a generalist, though, because there's a lot of unknown. What do you think the position of a generalist is on the job market today versus a specialist? Is it safer? Is it riskier? Are you more anti-fragile? Are you more adaptable? Are there more opportunities? Do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I think there's no clear answer. Look, I love being a generalist. I will always be a generalist, also not by choice. It's just, you know, I don't know something super well. I could just go and dive deep into something. It's a lot safer to be a specialist. So if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of appetite for like crazy rides and like not knowing what's next and like being open to crazy opportunities, I think being a specialist is just a very safe thing, at least for now, right? Depending on what you pick. Because for example, if you're an engineering specialist, you continue, you know, and you're continuously learning new engineering technologies and languages, then you can pretty much find a job in a lot of places. Same with design, etc. When you're a generalist, it's a little scary because there's so many moments in a day when I think like, I don't know anything. Like, what do I even know? I like kind of studied philosophy, barely remember anything. Like, I'm Googling half the time. Like, why is it that like I can do this job and someone else can't do this job? And so there's a lot of moment of self-doubt. I think you need to be a lot better at talking about yourself and like presenting yourself intelligently, because it's not super clear immediately from your resume necessarily what it is that you add to a company. You're not just like, I'm the best engineer there is. You're like, you know, I'm a quick learner. I have this much experience. These are things I've done before that I couldn't do. So you can, that means you can give me other things I don't know and I will figure them out. And I can work with a lot of different people. So designers, engineers, product managers, and cross-functional organizations. I'm very nimble and quick, and I learn. So I think you need to be able to position yourself like that. And you also, I think, as a generalist, need to rely on specialists. So, you know, if I join a new organization, for example, at Duolingo, I think I succeeded because I knew that the engineers were smarter at engineering than me, and the designers were smarter at design than me, and the PMs were better PMs than me. It's like I had a team of people who were better than me, not like as humans or as managers, but at the thing they were doing. And so I really needed to rely on their expertise and their opinion, and cultivating their voices and letting them feel safe to speak in the team, and like being the person who also, like, this was very useful for me at Duolingo, having social skills is very underrated, and communication skills, I think, it's hard to be like, I'm a good manager because I have good social communication skills, right? It sounds like you're good at being at a party, but when you're at a company and you're with a lot of engineers, in general, this is a stereotype, engineers tend to not have developed their social and communication and emotional skills as much as maybe, you know, other
recruitment.
Yeah. Yes. And so, you know, being able to draw people out of their shell and like get their expertise, get them to speak up is a big part of being a manager, and making people get along. And it really, like, really small example is like, you know, if the designer says, here's the design we're going to do for this experiment, and you say, awesome, engineer, do this design, and they'll be like, great, right? That's a very easy way of going about that. You probably just lost 2 weeks of work, because if you go talk to the engineer and you start understanding kind of like, you know, how much time it's going to take you and why, he'll point out that like, well, you know, these 2 animations here will take me an extra 3 days. And you're like, we don't need an animation. And you go back and you talk to the designer, and the designer said, no, I need this animation. It's like very important. And I'm like, okay, but how about we do that for like the second version of this? First version, minimal viable product, like keep it super simple. And like having that ability to go in between people and get them to communicate their problems, because the engineers would otherwise just be quiet and do their job. Like they're not gonna, you know, I think that really helps. So I don't know if that's a generalist thing or if that's a communicator thing, but
I like it, and I like that you position yourself, if I understand correctly, as being quite humble within the organization. And cool, Gina. Listen, this has been really humbling, to be honest. I think people are really also appreciating the humility and the authenticity and the honesty here, where it wasn't a clear set path and you had everything figured out, and there was a little bit of you don't like to call it that way, but a bit of an imposter syndrome. And you know, the thing I'll retain is which you told me in the beginning, everything works out in the end, and also just Google. a lot of the answers are at the end of our fingertips.
Yeah. And the other thing, just to leave everyone with a message, is you can only figure out the next step, is something I've learned in my life, both personally and as a career thing. You can only figure out what you're doing next. It's really hard to figure out what like your long-term thing is. Just figure out what your next thing is.
But every self-help book tells you to have this long-term objective and this long-term goal.
I have failed.
Reach for the stars
yeah. So
cool.
Thank you so much, you guys, and thank you for paying attention to this. David, thank you for the invitation. Please connect with me. I'm Gina on Instagram. So if anyone wants to connect with me there, or just add me on LinkedIn.
Are you at Gina on Instagram?
Yeah.
That's a valuable handle. Cool. That's morning, lunch, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are. Bye.